half a gallon. I mean,
Yeah. And like
roughly half a gallon per plant per day is for me about max size on an indoor.
Yeah.
Right? We'll do more on a greenhouse.
Sure.
I don't use a ton of water on the indoor stuff. I'm very low runoff. The only time I'm really looking for runoff is weeks 3 through 6 of flower, when I'm really just trying to keep that plant stretching up. After it's done stretching, I go to a really vegetative schedule and try to push those buds to be longer instead of fatter, because the last few weeks we're just bulking anyways. I don't want such big buds that I'm starting.
We're Jug Dealers, we're the podcast you need in your feed, teaching the game like you never seen. Jerin, Gabe, GRAMBO, true OGs, masters of the globe, set your mind free. From Denver, Colorado, where the data's green, we set the data points for the SOPs. Jug Dealers Podcast, yes indeed.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Jug Dealers Podcast, where we discuss all things cannabis and lifestyle related, brought to you by the good people at 5-8, and as always, available at jugdealers.net and jugdealers.shop. Jayhawk, we're back in the studio.
We're back in the studio. We are back in the studio. Good to be here as always. Been a little bit. I've been far and wide since then.
Bro, you've been all over the place since the beginning of the year. I mean, we both went to Spain, but then you went to Germany.
Yeah, just got back from Germany. That was a whirlwind. I guess. Why not? Got the Tyson 2.0.
Show him the grinder.
Yeah,
right
I wanted to specifically do that. Shout out to the Tyson 2.0 crew, Jack and all the boys. We had a great time. I had Mike in the booth. It was wildness, but
this is the coolest grinder ever.
We got a Mike Tyson grinder, and we had to
you gotta be kidding me.
Yeah. This is real, folks.
So that's an ear.
Yeah. Yes. And not only is it an ear, there's like a little piece missing out of the ear.
Functional grinder, folks. Functional grinder. So we had to remind ourselves this is actually Holyfield's ear, not Tyson's ear, as we all remember. So anyway, shout out to the Tyson crew. Berlin, Mary Jane Berlin. It was a total whirlwind. It was absolutely amazing. Saw everybody, felt like from all over the world. Definitely just ended up being, in a lot of ways, the show that Cannabis always wanted to be. And it's not that I don't, truthfully, Barcelona, what a city, right? But the event never quite got to be this. And this thing was crazy. I mean, 100,000 people easy, huge outdoor area, had to be 1,000 booths. It was, 5-6 halls, probably be bigger next year. But yeah, man, that was a lot of fun. Also, shout out to the DLI crew, because that's who I was out helping. We were with the Dutch Lighting Innovations guys for the whole weekend. So.
Oh yeah, well we got a big episode. We got a big episode today. We had a good friend who was in town, and as soon as he hit me up, I was like, "Bro,
we better get this one in.
We got to get you in and get you on, because ultimately, you know a lot more than us on a subject that we get asked about
a lot,
and we'll be the first ones to tell you, man. Hey, this is not our forte." So in studio today, Shane Hutto, Rockwool extraordinaire.
There you go.
I've grown some plants.
You've grown some plants. I've seen it with my own eyes.
Why don't you give us just a quick little rundown of just who you are for the ones that don't know, a little bit of your background education wise, and then also, run right into where you're at, in the industry and what you've done. And then we'll rock right into it.
So I really started as a legacy grower in Oklahoma. Quickly realized at a young age that I was destined to do this. Converted my
on board
degrees at university, both to horticulture. So I got a bachelor's and master's from Oklahoma State. And then my first job out of school was
Go Cowboys.
Grodan.
Well, there you go. So straight out of
school, right to Grodan.
Stillwater to Grodan.
Yeah.
What a nice.
What year was this?
What year was 2011.
So. Oh, wow. So this is really for
early.
Us. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I was one of the first guys at Grodan to push openly towards cannabis. They were really afraid, and
they were doing like tomatoes and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, and they knew they were growing cannabis, but
But it was like, whatever. I'm not going to
they weren't going to admit that, right?
Right.
And they were going to put somebody on staff that was pushing it.
Yeah.
Right.
Of course.
Right. They were fine to stack hydro stores with it.
That was how I moved to Denver. They actually let me move from Oklahoma to Denver as an employee. So
Gotcha.
It was pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's killer, bro. That's killer. Yeah. I mean, that's when you want to be doing it and getting in with those companies.
Yep.
So that was a great career start for me. And, at some point I maxed out there, and my wife and I started to do our own consulting firm.
Mm-hmm.
And so we started designing facilities, doing licensing in the competitive states, building them, and then training the staff and running SOPs and everything. Like really pushing the envelope.
I remember those days.
We did that for about 7 years. Yeah, Jerin, we were working together a lot. Then I ended up owning a couple of facilities here in Colorado. That lasted only a couple of years before COVID hit and just sort of sank me.
Man, that hit a lot of people hard.
You actually own the greenhouse right around the corner from my house down on Evans. It used to be
a while ago.
Yeah, that's so funny.
I was on paper as the owner for sure. On the hook. Once that all went down in flames, I went to Cresco in Illinois. So I got the privilege to run a very huge facility. It was like 12,000 lights, half indoor, half greenhouse.
I saw that place. It was,
I know you did.
It was mind blowing. I mean, I've seen some really big facilities. I've built some really big facilities, and that one was so I was so impressed.
And not to spoil any surprises, but that was all on Rockwool, right?
So we actually converted it to Rockwool while I was there.
Okay,
I was part of that conversion. I was the one that really implemented all of the joint decisions on, how we were going to steer those rooms and those greenhouses versus indoor.
Well, this is one of the things we've been talking to people, a lot about. It's not that less herbs being grown; it's just being grown by less people on a larger scale. Yeah. And there's much more of a movement towards good, bad, or indifferent homogenization and monocropping and horticulture-based principles, right?
Absolutely.
And I do think that when you talk about really large scale stuff, it doesn't even make sense to necessarily do certain programs on that scale. Maybe it makes sense to do it in 10% of the facility or something like that, and have a really top shelf brand or whatever. But again, I keep telling people, look, no matter what, these are all going to go more towards those type of principles when you're talking about large scale, production. So I know when we get into this a little bit, that's one of the things that I want to talk to you about is just, why it really does make sense for commercial growing. And we don't necessarily need to, get too much into that now, because I want to kind of start from the top, but
sure.
Yeah. Sure. Anyway, Gabe, why don't you get us started off and just kind of let's as we like to do, start it from the top.
So, we were discussing before the show, one of our best episodes is cocoa, and we really dived into that. And so I really kind of want to take a little bit of that with you and talk about, we had been discussing how Rockwool is really the Ferrari of the hydro industry. Absolutely. And it's really easy to crash and burn, but what makes it really efficient, and where does it get misused? Because I think, you've been to Holland, we've been to Holland, and one of the things we were blown away by is these giant plants and these 6-8
almost
blocks,
almost nothing.
Yeah. So kind of dive into it for our listeners.
So for me, the biggest mistake, Rockwool, is losing the ceiling. I think people don't understand that you have to keep your blocks slightly wetter early on to build your root mass.
Mm-hmm.
But then you got to dry them down to accelerate the root mass. And then you can't let it go too dry, because then you're going to lose the root mass.
Okay.
And so when I'm
Hence
steering,
that Ferrari,
yeah, it's the Ferrari, right? It's keep it between the corners and go as fast as you can. And there's a lot of increasing speed, slowing down. And for me, I actually plan the timing of how many weeks before harvest do I want to lose my root mass. Essentially.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Start drying that plant down. And,
right.
You time that with some defoliation. You can have a really nice combo. I think the other biggest mistake Rockwool growers make is not growing for taste, right? We know that the blocks can yield. It's about how do you get the taste out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think that's the biggest thing is people just end up thinking that, and funny enough though, it was a lot more popular in home growing in the 90s, and then now it's obviously a lot more popular in commercial. But there are a certain amount of people, old school consumers, that really love Rockwool herb. It's to them that's just to some of us sometimes it's either a little bit bland or maybe even cheming, which I'm not necessarily saying is fair, but the way that I think people were running it then, which isn't near as well as they're running it now. Yeah.
Well, and some of what we had discussed before the show too was OGs, man.
Yeah.
The way to grow OGs is in Rockwool, man. I always found that was some of my favorite flower, especially back in the early 2000s, was OG grown in Rockwool, especially SFV.
I was literally about to say, but
SFV is the one.
That's yes.
So, I mean, what are some tips for our listeners to be able to really get that flavor out of Rockwool that you would recommend?
Hey, everybody. Didn't want to interrupt the flow of the conversation, but did want to remind you that anything we talk about that are our products, you can find at jugdealers.shop 24/7 online. Go and get it. Support us. Help us, continue doing what we're doing. Jugdealers.shop. Thanks a bunch. Now back to the show.
Get that flavor out of rock wool that you would recommend.
For me, it's mostly about finishing, right? It's how are you manipulating your nitrogen levels week 6 through finish is a huge part of it. Are you pumping enough sulfur? Sulfur is your number one component of a terpene.
Yeah, it's an essential part of aromatic rings. Yeah,
and the plant is still feeding really heavy on potassium, phosphorus, and calcium all the way through the end. So you need to have a recipe or some sort of nutrient line that is really manipulating that life cycle to get the taste and drive it.
Sure.
And then for me, call it a fertilizer savings, if you will, but I'm still a flush guy. I still run the last week as straight water. Yep. I really believe that at least that way we're not punching it with salt.
Right.
We're pulling it back, converting to sugar.
Sure. No, I do love that. I still love that you take that approach and that you're willing to drive it hard, but also like use some of the things because again, just because it's, anecdotal data. Thank you, Mr. GRAMBO. Anecdata.
I heard you use that with Robert Connell Clark, and I was like,
yeah. So, because it matters. It on its own can be called into question, but now that we have more and more science, we have more things backing it up. I love the meeting of both of those things and saying, well, let's look at quote unquote, real data, right? But then also let's look at the anecdotal data. Let's look at the, how do things smoke? How does it feel? Even like, and how does it dry? How does, kind of all these kind of things. One of the things that I'm always in the lesson that I had to learn is, we always used to equate, plant mass with root mass and realizing that really your plant size is much more tied to your irrigation strategy than it is your substrate size. But again, going back to like what Gabe said, it's like, growing flowers in like literally 4-inch blocks.
Absolutely.
Or people, growing huge plants in 8-inch blocks or whatever. That's more about irrigation strategy and staying in that, like in between the walls, like you said.
I mean, I was pushing 7-foot tall plants with 6-inch cubes all day.
There you go. Yeah.
Do you find,
there you go.
Having worked at Grodan and seeing both sides as far as tomatoes, because I know, for any of us who grew back in the 90s, it was always comparing it to tomatoes. And I think that was more a light cycle thing than anything.
That's so funny.
But do you find, having spent that time at Grodan, do you find that you adjusted the schedule that they had, people had generically used for tomatoes to cannabis, and there's kind of a different feed regimen
there was
you would
definitely
recommend?
a component of that. The first guy that really trained me on crop steering was Phil Johnson. He is now these days running Moochie Farms, huge vegetable outfit. They grow hundreds and hundreds of acres.
California.
It's actually Michigan.
Oh, wow.
Ontario. I want to say they have one in Ohio.
Really cool.
There are several locations, but hundreds of acres under glass. And, this was, back in 2011 when he and I first started working on this real true irrigation strategy and crop steering of cannabis. I think I still go back. There's actually one guy at Grodan that I still go back to. His name's Andy Lee. He's in the UK. He, to me, is the greatest mind in crop steering.
Okay. Hot tip.
I go ask him things about, like, for example, the other day, we were talking about crop steering veg plants, right? You don't see much conversation around crop steering veg plants in the literature. And for me, that's the natural evolution, right? We need to be steering veg. We need to really be steering clone. And I mean, some of my SOPs, I would say I'm driving clone more than steering.
I was going to say, are you, because I know over the years, I've definitely changed my thoughts as far as what you can do, thanks to Phil Haig and those guys. Yeah. But, I run it pretty hard right out of the gate, and I know a lot of people get real nervous about that, but I'm like, literally, I'll feed it full strength veg juice. Like, let's go.
Yeah. And I actually know one guy feeding his clones straight out of the cut out of 5.0.
Wow.
I'm like, you're kind of crazy, bro.
Wow. But I'm watching.
I am watching. I'm around a 2.0 on a clone, but
okay.
For me,
which is still,
if you're not pairing your light level with your EC, you're doing it wrong.
Well, that's the law of the minimums, right? Yeah. Okay. I like
for
it.
me, so I'm associated a 2.0 to a 200 micromole, like for cloning. That's me.
All right. I like that. Can you, one thing I would actually like to, and this is backing up a little bit, but it just got me thinking, like, for some of the people that don't know, like, what the heck is Rockwool? Can you give us like a super crash course and like, what is Rockwool? Where the heck did it come from? Why? You know what I mean?
Why is it different than insulation?
So I can tell you all of those answers, actually. Let's start at the insulation question and then move to the story.
I love it.
Essentially, the way it's different from insulation is treated with a water repellent.
Okay.
Rockwool is treated with a water absorbent.
Right.
So that's your difference.
Cool.
Well, there you go.
I mean, and it is essentially fiberglass.
I wouldn't call it fiberglass. So it's a basalt rock.
Okay.
That they literally melt into lava and then spin it like cotton candy to get the fibers. Then they take those fibers and lay them out into mats, huge mats, and then compact them to the right density, cut them.
And why? Like, is it only is this like a byproduct, or is this something that's only done to specifically make a substrate?
Well, it's done on the same manufacturing plants and lines as the insulation typically.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
But it is specifically
done as a substrate horticultural, substrate alternative.
The story goes, way back when, I don't know, 100 years,
way back
some insulation fell off a truck in Holland or Denmark, wherever it was, landed in a puddle. And then the driver came back the next day or a couple days later, and there was a plant growing in it.
Right.
And he took it back to the factory, and that's how Grodan was born. At least that's the story I was
Hey, look, heard it first here, folks.
Crazy.
That's the first time I've heard that story. It sounds good. I like it. I mean, I'm going to go with it. I like it.
That's kind of how I feel about it. It may not be true, but
hey, whatever. That sounds great. All right. That's perfect. Because honestly, even for my own thing, I've always been like, you know what? There's a bit of mystery around it, right?
Yeah.
So next thing I definitely want to talk a little bit more about is just like, which we were already kind of started on, right? Just feeding philosophy. So I guess move on, right, from clone and just kind of talk about like stacking and maybe how EC builds in the substrate and some things like that.
I'll give you my whole like scheme, right? Call it a scheme.
Get your pencils out, people. Get your pencils out.
I'm coming out of clone. Really, I want my clones to be pulled out early. I want them as fast as those roots are going. Really 14 days maximum. I'd rather pull them out at 10, but in most large scale, hard to keep your schedule and stay at that 10 day.
Yeah.
You're harvesting every week.
Even if you're rooted at 10 days, you're still waiting to 14 because that's what the schedule says.
Exactly.
And that's what I tell people all the time. Look, but you live in, when you have, I'm imagining if you had 12,000 lights, you probably had 50,000 plants in flower or something like that. It probably more.
Typically it was 100,000 in the building
you ran
at any
smart
given time.
But you cannot afford, you live and die by the schedule.
Yeah, you have to.
Absolutely.
Have to.
You got to be able to manipulate the schedule too.
Yeah. Yeah, if a tray dies, you got to be able to call the audible.
Exactly. You better have 2 or 3 audibles ready to go.
Yep, we've all been there.
So I'm pulling out of clone at 14 days and 200 micromoles and jumping right into 600 micromoles for veg. Mm-hmm. Depending on my schedule, I'm running 2 or 3 weeks in veg. Really, like my strategy early in veg is to keep them pretty dry. I go for generative shots. So a couple of big shots in the middle of the day, spaced apart where you get a couple.
How many feeds a day are you running?
For starting veg, I'm probably doing 2, maybe 3, depending on if I know it's a drinker or not. And then each week, roughly, I'm adding a shot, right? For the first 2 weeks. And then, if they're really pulling and we see good rooting, then I'm going to start overfeeding them a little bit, putting some drain through it to keep those roots like sucking. Right. Getting them ready for that, flip. And then when I'm ready to flip them into flower, I'm coming in, really starting at probably 800 micromoles and within 2-3 days, ramping that to 1,000, even 1,200.
1,200. Okay. Aggressive. But again, you're matching your light intensity with your
high EC.
Yep.
I'm running a 3.0 input feed. I really want my block EC coming out of veg around a 6. And I want to go into flower at a 6, but when I go into flower, I'm really hydrated. I'm a little heavy, a little bit wet because they're going to start ramping with that light level, right?
Yep.
And so just trying to keep those blocks early flower a little bit wet without a lot of runoff because I don't want to bleed my EC down. And so
how are you monitoring that? Do you actually have, things in the root zone to monitor?
I do. Okay. Yeah. So typically I'm using some sort of sensor, whether that's a probe or a scale.
And do you have it just programmed in that, hey, when we get to 45% moisture level, we're going to give 300 milliliters of water type thing?
Not so much. It's for me, I'm not really on the AI growing just yet. You know, we've kind of played with it a little bit, but I'm not convinced.
Right.
I'm watching my graph, right? I'm watching the moisture content go up and how fast it's coming down. I'm watching the EC graph. Am I stacking or am I losing EC, right?
Right.
And that's where I'm making those decisions. The one I always tell growers is like, you need to manage EC with shot size. You need to manage drybacks with shot count. You know, I run a scheme.
Great tip.
Yeah. Like that's
look at Jerin. Jerin is like, you soak that one up.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good one.
I keep my same shot size all day. My standard sort of like starting point for most people, I tell 100 mil shots.
I was going to ask, but that can build up depending on.
Yeah. If your EC's too high, you're going to put bigger shots.
So is your initial shot bigger and then the rest of the shots are going to be the 100 mils? No,
100 mils all day.
Okay.
Now, if you're needing to bring the EC down a little bit, well, you're going to go to 200 mils or 150.
But across the board.
But across the board.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yep.
Interesting. That's a great tip. That's definitely, and it's something where, you know, I've never ran it. So a lot of these things
you're just saying 100 mil as a baseline number so that people, understandably, if it was going to be 500 mils a day, that's not very much.
Yeah, I mean, that's not very much for a 6 foot tall plant. You know, by the time I get to, week 6, I might be hitting it 14 times a day.
Okay. Because I was going to say
so you're looking at like a half a gallon. I mean, that, or,
Yeah. And like
roughly half a gallon per plant per day is for me about max size on an indoor.
Yeah.
Right? We'll do more on a greenhouse.
Sure.
Based on
all the other factors.
half a gallon. That's
about what I do. I mean, as far as if I'm doing an estimate,
historically, that's substantially less than what I use. And I actually really,
I don't use a ton of water on the indoor stuff. I'm very low runoff. The only time I'm really looking for runoff is weeks 3 through 6 of flower, when I'm really just trying to keep that plant stretching up. After it's done stretching, I go to a really vegetative schedule and try to push those buds to be longer instead of fatter, because the last few weeks we're just bulking anyways. I don't want such big buds that I'm starting to mold them.
Right. No, I love it. I mean, again, these are very, applicable and realistic.
Pro tips. Pro tips. Dude.
Yeah. GRAMBO, can you move that up a bit?
I was going to say, I actually wanted to say, like, compare some of your strategy, because obviously, or maybe it's not different, but compare some of your strategies on something like Cresco to the guy who's running the tent, because we got a lot of both. We got a lot of people who listen in the big facilities, and we got a lot of people who are home growers. And quite frankly, I answer a lot of the Jug Dealer questions that come in through the page.
Sure.
He does some of the emails. I do some of the other ones. And I'll be honest with you, I get a lot of folks who either hit me DWC or some type of hydro, Rockwell, primarily. And I'm kind of like, I don't know that I have the best answer, because I have the least experience with Rockwell.
So for me to talk about home grows, a lot of the strategies are the same. I think the irrigation strategy specifically should be pretty close. Maybe if you're not open wide spaces with tons of light, you might need to dial back some of those.
I was going to say, I'm sure I'll bet those ECs need to be dialed back a little bit, just not being in that real high intensity situation. However, for me, still matching the EC, right, with the intensity. Yeah,
exactly. And so for me, like, grow with intent is what I tell people, right?
I love it.
Every action that you're touching the plant or irrigating the plant or how you're irrigating your environment, everything's sending a cue. So make sure everything you're doing has a distinct reason. Even if your reason isn't right, have something behind your thinking in your mind.
Yeah. Grow with intent. I like that a lot. That's something everybody should.
That's something Fletcher says too.
Yeah.
He's like, dude.
All right.
Yeah, no, I love
company.
that. Well, and that's great company. That's perfect company.
He's like, I don't care what your reasons are. Just make sure you have reasons. Make sure they're, for your reasons,
not because
everybody else is chasing candy or something like that. He's like, I'd much rather have a person, grow something they really believe in than be like, oh, I'm growing candy because everybody it sells.
Absolutely.
Right. Hey everybody, just wanted to remind you that if you want to try any of the products that you see us talking about or using in our own gardens, go to jugdealers.shop. And now back to the show.
Growing candy because everybody it sells, you know.
Absolutely.
Right. You know, one of the things I wanted to ask about is just this whole sterility and growing clean and, you know, all that kind of thing. Because again, one of my whole things is number one, like plants and clean and lack of, you know, microbial relationships, you know, you being a horticulturalist as well. It's like, that's laughable. They've been synonymous in their evolutionary pattern and development and course to where these things do operate together. But how does that work with rock wool?
Yeah. So for me, it's about biosecurity, right? Like number one, you talk about being clean. I want your floors mopped and your tables clean between runs and like,
sure.
You know, keep that clean. But your media, the minute you put water on it, it's no longer sterile or.
You hear that, folks? You hear that, folks? Listen up, everybody.
We're building some microbiology.
Thank you, Shane.
Regardless. Now, you know, I think, the microbiology that we're attempting to apply to rock wool, I think there's some truth to it that once you have a good base root mass in there and then you inoculate, now you're going to get some fungal hyphae that are going to build up and attach to that root mass.
Sure.
But to try and charge a rock wool block with microbiology ahead of time, I think that's pretty rough.
And you think that's where a lot of people screw up in the, okay.
Yeah, you need to inoculate the roots of rock wool more so than the block.
But that makes sense. That's not 100%. A natural environment for them. You're literally throwing them into something completely weird. They have no idea what it is. It's not like charging a soil.
Yeah. No. And I mean, that's why I kind of started on my current project with the wood fiber was just the microbiology of it. It makes so much sense. Well,
and it's kind of one of the things even we talked about with our cocoa, with doing it with chips as opposed to perlite, because perlite doesn't create any microbial environment, right? Yeah. It's just for, you know, tilth and for, you know, basically to be, you know, water passing, you know what I mean? So it's like at the end of the day, and of course it keeps a little more structure with cocoa as it breaks down, but reality is it doesn't do anything else, right? So I think having these alternatives, you know, and smart alternatives and alternatives that are for people that, you know, that have been using rock wool for a long time, which you still have a big part of the legacy market that's rock wool people. You know what I mean?
No, seriously.
You really do.
And I think people are looking for a solid alternative to rock wool that, you know, really has a similar dry back and steerability, but is not, you know.
Right. Now, let me ask you this. Recycling, you know, I've always heard this like, you know, I've always heard a rumor and that there's only a couple in the nation, which I find hard to believe that there's even one.
Well, here's my thought on it too. Most of the guys I know who are running rock wool blocks, by the time that thing is finished and it, you know, it's mostly roots. It's not much wool.
Yeah. How do you, that's true. That's actually a good point.
Like I know when I transplant, I still use rock wool cubes to clone in because they're consistent. It's what I teach people in. It's the easiest thing to do. I know it backwards, forwards, upside down. But when I transplant that, by the time I've harvested, there's very little left of that. So
like, I mean,
and I hear that come, oh, you got, you know, there's a certain person who we won't talk about, but I think we all know who I'm referring to. But that stuff's going in the dumps and you don't care about synergy and all the rest of the stuff. And I'm like, no, dude, like,
well, let's Shane, can you comment on that? I mean, really, if there are options, what are they?
I mean, I don't really know what they're doing these days.
Sure.
To be honest, I know that in Europe, they definitely have some programs. I think in Canada, there's some programs, but I don't think they're really well developed or widespread.
So even in, let's say, these situations where you have large scale indoor on veggie production or whatever, they're just getting thrown in the dump. All of it is.
I think in the US and most of Europe. Yeah.
How bad is it for the dump? Considering what I said about the roots,
it doesn't really break down. I don't think the dump really cares other than just
it's a lot of mass,
giant. Yeah,
it's in there with a bunch of other shit that doesn't break down.
Low density, high volume product that is like
yeah. And again, I just think that's one of those things that's that always seems to come up. But again, to Gabe's point, it's like, what the hell are you going to even get to and recycle by the time you've taken the
don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to be, you know, you guys know I hike a lot. I'm about the environment, but when you look at it and you start to break it apart, like there's a lot of roots in there. And
it is mostly roots, I would say.
Yeah.
So now, speaking of obviously the fact that I really did love your comments on sterile system. As soon as you put water in it, like, come on, like, and I always say, look, there's no killing microbes, man. Like, you don't just get rid of microbes. But and being that New Millennium really is that, and known very much as that synganic, mixing, of the minds, and that the beneficials play a huge part right along with the 17 plant essential. Any tips with New Millennium and Rockwool? I mean, because here's one of the things that I know I'm always a little bit afraid of. By the time you get up and you're doing 14 shots a day, and typically something like winter frost in cocoa or soil, for example, you'd use at least 3 times over a week period, right? To get that initiation, to get that oil push, things like that. I'm afraid to have somebody that's doing 14 times a day do honestly more than like one full day right now. Can you comment on that?
I mean, I would say, like, think about total water volume, right?
Okay. Yeah.
1.4 liters is not a ton of usage.
Okay.
So, and like I said, the only way you're going to hit 1.4 liters, probably, at least my strategy wise, is, you're probably pushing 1,300 micromoles.
Right. So you're saying, like, ultimately, volume wise, it's not that much. So, I mean, and to be honest with you, I'm surprised that you are still going straight water for that for a full week. But I guess you've got it stacked to 6 till about that point. So there's food in there.
Once I'm in flower, I'm really pushing that block EC up to 8, maybe 10.
Okay.
Pushing higher.
So by the
time I hit that last week,
there's food in there.
Yeah, there's tons of food in there.
And you're still not running a lot of water through it. So it's just, you're just eating what's in there.
Exactly.
Okay. So in a situation, let's say in an 8-week system where you'd run whatever you want to do, New Millennium or otherwise, through that 6 weeks, week 7, we're typically doing, winter frost and Ruby. Ruby might be maybe not the best product with Rockwool. We do have the Full VTech that doesn't have the bacteria in there. If you run those together, run it the full week, run it 5 days worth. What do you think? I mean, I would probably run it the full week. All right. I mean, I'm always afraid to. But again, I guess if you've ran into that EC and that's the thing, and maybe that's
when you're up
where I think people might make those mistakes is they're getting into late flower and really not running the block and stack it up enough to where they have enough to make it through.
Yeah, and so interesting point, because the last 2 weeks of flower, what I'm doing for my irrigation strategy is I'm starting, hard dry back, really 20% dry back, like total volumetric water. I'm like, I want to be around 15 the last 2 weeks, but I'm doing one hour apart shots all day long. Right. So I don't even hit peak saturation until the last shot of the day.
Okay.
And if I'm not drying back hard enough, I'm dropping a shot. Right. So as that plant's slowing down, as maybe I'm dropping my light level or lowering my CO2 to slow it down and ripen harder, I'm dropping those shots, and I may finish with only 7 shots at the end of flower the last 2 weeks.
Right. So, and then that definitely gets my head working in a way that it is understanding that people it's using it different at different times in it. You know what I mean? Especially the amount of shots and really how aggressive that's going to be. Because in my mind, it's like, oh shit, it's going to be so aggressive because it's, little shots of shit. Yeah, it's scary. It's
until you've done it is scary. I would agree.
So, I mean, I guess any general tips other than that with New Millennium and using New Millennium, or really any kind of like more synganic type program. First things you said, obviously, which is the obvious, keep your shit clean, people, right?
Yeah.
Keep your grow clean, clean your lines, do your all kind of stuff.
Do your de-leafs.
Do your de-leafing. For something that has any kind of particulate matter in the lines, for example, on the last shot of the day, do you do just a straight water, or do you do things that you flush out a little bit?
There's some places where I have a dump valve built in.
Okay.
And so typically I won't even do it at the last shot of the day. I'll do it before irrigation starts the next day. Because that water will sit overnight and it'll warm up a little bit. And I like to run, especially late flower, I'm running my water a little bit colder.
Okay. So I like it. So then you'll just dump that out, because I think, again, when you do have, some organic inputs.
It can build up.
Yeah, for sure. What do you like for cleaning lines? Why don't we talk about that?
I mean, I've used lots of different products, but these days, Sanidate is pretty much what I use for cleaning lines.
Okay. And is that just for cleaning between grows, or are you able to clean between reservoirs?
I mean, I'm just doing that between crops.
Yep. You're doing like a line shot, hold it in the line overnight.
Hold it in the line overnight.
Run it out.
Yep. So that's your kind of general maintenance. And of course, I'm sure you've got some kind of filter screen in line as well.
I've got lots of filters. I've got a filter on every table.
Okay. And I mean, why don't you talk a little bit about that, just because it's a common question that comes up for people when they're injecting and they're going, hey, I'm getting from point A to point B, but geez, I get all this buildup.
I would say, especially if you have buildup, make sure you're cleaning your lines and as often as you can, like even our fertigation skids, we would shut down once a week and do a base clean. And then like once a month, we'll rip it fully apart and spend a whole day just cleaning that fertigation skid. And, even if I have to schedule the fertigation team to come in a little bit late that day and stay after the shot, it is what it is. Like you got to be cleaned. Like, I want every line cleaned, like even to the point where our huge, 12,000 gallon tanks, we would send a guy down, pressure wash the inside. And
get in there.
I've been there. I used to do the thousands myself.
It's not a pretty job, but it's got to be done. So an inline filter, how many microns are you typically running with just a general inline? I
mean, I have several, right? So I'm going to have a base filter coming into the skid, a fertigation injection system. I'm going to have another one leaving it. And then I'm going to have another one before the valve.
Right.
And then I'm going to have another one after that.
Yeah.
So anywhere from,
a lot of redundancy there. I like it.
200 microns up to 400, 600, 800 microns.
Awesome. No, I think those are great tips too. But these are the things that come up for Gabe and I just a lot because we deal with, so many great questions from, our listeners and from our customers.
If you want to talk cleaning those filters, right? How often are you cleaning them? Should be determined by how dirty they are. So your maintenance program, some filters we have to clean every day.
There you go.
Others can be once a week. Or, in midsummer when we're pulling nasty stuff out of the well, you might have to do that 3 or 4 times a day.
As many times as needed. It's kind of like, when does it need to be watered?
Yes.
When it needs to be watered. When does it need to be clean? Whenever it needs to be clean. So obviously keeping up with the maintenance. And I think that's, honestly, I think this whole clean, not clean thing gets just blamed on bad maintenance a lot.
I agree. Yeah.
Like a lot. Like it's not clean or not clean. It's like, that's just kind of bullshit. It's just one thing that like people are, it's another easy thing to pick on. It's just like nutrients are easy to pick on.
Part of growing.
Yeah. Well, wait, plant janitors or custodian. I still, it's like custodian.
I think that's one of the things. I think that's one of the things that people like most about wool is, for any of us who, again, we're growing back in the 90s, I could tell you right now, I haven't had Hydroton in my house in 25 years.
And my feet are happy.
There's still Hydroton in my house.
Oh God.
You know what I mean? That's like there's still a hydrocoral somewhere floating in my house.
That's because
I think that's one of the things people like about rock wool is that
it doesn't happen. That doesn't happen.
There's no dirt, there's no, and so I respect that part of it.
Look, Hydroton is the herpes of the substrate world. Okay. That shit is never going away.
I'm telling you.
Never going away.
I cleaned out my dad's storage unit 5 years ago, and I found a piece in a drawer. I was like, you got to be kidding.
What's your favorite dripper size? Because I know a lot of times too, when people are doing that.
Good question. I love this conversation, right? Because I see all types. I do a lot of consulting.
Yes.
I see guys running 1 gallon per hour, 2 gallon per hour, half a gallon.
Right.
My personal preference is really the smaller the better, as long as it doesn't clog.
Right.
So the longer your shots can be, the more distributed, the more even that irrigation is going to be.
Okay.
And so my personal selection, I would say of the last 2 years, I'm running 1.6 liter per hour.
1.6 liter.
That's a quarter gallon an hour.
That's a third of a gallon.
Okay.
And I run 2 per plant.
2 per plant, third of a gallon per hour. Okay. I love because trust me, we get hit with these, and a lot of people will do a 2 gallon per hour or something like that are running a little bit, something
but
that
then your
they
shots
do have
are
clogging
only like 30 seconds, right?
They are. They're short shots.
Okay. Now think about when you kick your pump on,
right?
How long till the last dripper starts pushing?
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So now, okay, let's say it's 5 or 10 seconds for that last dripper. I mean, if you got a big grow, you're losing a third of that.
Yeah. And I will say a lot of times these people are doing a little bit longer shots because they are in cocoa as opposed to rock wool. So like this is consider this to be rock wool specific size. But I love that because trust me, we get asked this shit all the time.
So great question. How do you ensure that the end of the line performs the same way as the head of the line if you have a 40-foot table?
Great question.
Yes. Yeah. And for me, there's number one way to prove it. I've had lots of different arguments with people about this, but the way you want to do it is graduated beakers on the table, right?
Boom.
Middle, end,
Yep.
and other end.
Yep.
And measure
That's it.
right?
That's it.
Boom.
No argument.
If you can't hit within, really, I would say within 5%,
5%.
there's a couple things you can do. Number one, I really like the loop on the irrigation line so that it runs to the end and back, as opposed to just one solid line.
Okay.
That's one. I've also done it where, you've got a bunch of different tables on one big valve.
Yep.
And so what I've had to do was put different weight of pressure regulators on different tables to even that graduation out.
Yep.
The
And-
farther out, the
Yes.
more, yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
There's
And
an
I
head
tried
pressure.
it, just a pro tip, and I know you would agree with this. You really try and get your irrigation, your fertigation room centralized in the building. So it's kind of
Yeah.
like an octopus,
Yes.
as opposed to having it at one end of the building. And you have one flower room that's close, and then you have one flower room that's like
That's a
200
great point,
yards
Gabe.
away.
Yes.
Yeah, and even if you're in a home grow, thinking about things like that, you know what I mean. Those kind of principles still play true. So I'm glad you bring that up.
Water traveling, not only, I think you and I had a comical discussion about the fact that we saw a place in Jersey. I'm not going to call out any names, but they had 3 levels of irrigation. And instead of coming in from the top and coming down, they came in from the floor and went up.
Man.
And so, not only were they going up, they were going up at the end of the line, in which the head pressure, which people need to think about, if you're going to put the head pressure anywhere, you want to put it at the beginning of the line. You don't want to put it a couple hundred yards out. And so literally these guys actually had to shut down their rooms like that because they couldn't get water up to the third level.
Yeah.
Water's heavy. It's 8 pounds. I tell
8
people all the time, it's 8 pounds a gallon.
433 PSI per foot vertically.
Okay.
There you go.
Take note, people.
There you go. Well, this has been a great discussion for me too. It's something where I've learned a lot, and quite honestly, obviously you and I have worked together for the better part of a decade or more.
It's funny when we were in Holland last year, they were talking about Shane. And we went to
I mean, back to the Gavita days and Jair and and everything. So it's great to see that you're doing well and that we're able to have you in here. And you can also bring in just a level of expertise again, quite frankly, we don't have, and that's really what we're trying to bring to our listeners all the time. If they do have any questions, where can they find you, Shane? Where can they find you these days?
I mean, the Hydro Matrix pages definitely have my phone number and my email all over them. So it's growhydromatrix.com.
Growhydromatrix.com.
You can find me on LinkedIn, just my name, Shane Hutto. My Instagram is Road Trippin' Shane. I check it once in a while.
You're doing a little show, a little kind of promotional
There we
thing.
go. Road Tripping Shane.
I'm doing a campaign where what I do, as a consultant is I go around and I see different growers. I walk through their growers. Most of the time it's just me chilling with my homies, but they know that I can often give them some advice, and sometimes it's free, but we have a good time.
Right.
Well,
so
I can tell you, I definitely gained a lot of tidbits today, myself, and it's something that, you've got a lot of great experience in a very specific area, which again, we're seeing, especially with your, educational background as well, we're seeing this go more and more and more and more in that direction. Mm-hmm. So it's natural that, that your services would be needed.
I'm having a great time. Like, honestly, I'm loving life. I'm doing what I was born to do, man.
Well, thank you so much. I'm glad we got to have you in studio as well. Thanks for hitting us up, letting you know we were here. Don't be surprised if you see Shane back in studio.
Cool.
Next time you're in Colorado, definitely hit us up.
Absolutely.
I know you've got some other.
We wanted to talk environmental steering. You and I were.
Yeah.
We've all discussed it as a group as far as different times on the show, but we think it's really something that a lot of people, they're always looking crop steering down low, but they're not looking at the entire package in which it all, it's like when Jerin gets upset about the CO2 thing. You know what I mean? Like, you guys are way too worried about too much other shit before the CO2 is the last one you should worry about it. But we definitely want to have.
We'll have you back for that. I actually think that's a great little teaser for you guys.
I'll hit you guys up for sure.
Perfect. Thank you guys so much. Thanks everybody for watching.
Appreciate it.
From the Jug Den. Yeah. Until next time, we'll see you guys here real soon. Thanks for watching. Peace out.